We have an interesting panel, and to make things a little more interesting, we're not going to be either in the order that's listed in the program or in the order that we're seated in. We are unilaterally increasing the entropy of the universe just by being here. So with that, the topic we're going to be addressing is innovation and how trade and services also interact with innovation, and where policies are, what technologies and the import of those technologies are. And I wanted to go perhaps a little bit to what are some of the benefits that you get from getting innovation right, from getting innovation policy right, from creating the correct technical environment, the correct educational environment. You can drive economic growth. You can drive societal benefit. You can contribute to improved health and quality of life, improve both efficiency in terms of energy and sustainability in terms of energy. You support new business opportunities and new business models, lower barriers to entry of existing market, cloud, other things like that, which have managed to do that, although we now see in some places new barriers getting put up to exactly those entries into the market. You enable knowledge transfer and distance learning. You support capacity building. You support rural development, as well as kind of urban integration and the creation of zones. You enable the improved delivery of government services. And all of these are some of the benefits you can get if you do it right. And for those of you who know me, I'm going to reference a document I always reference, and that's the APEC Digital Prosperity Checklist. And the reason I relate to that document is that it talks about the context that's necessary in order to put in place many of the things we're talking about. And APEC, or at least the authors of this document, were fond of alliteration, so they called it the 6 I's. And the I's were innovation, what we're going to be talking about today. How does your economy, how is it present and ready and able to innovate? How does it support innovation? Investment, whether it's foreign direct investment, whether it's microfinancing, whether it's fluid capital markets. Infrastructure, the technical infrastructure, the educational infrastructure, logistics, et cetera. Intellectual capital, including the ability to protect innovation in intellectual capital, including the ability of the populace to be ready from an educational point of view in terms of linguistics, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of technical capacity. Information flows, if information is the currency or the new oil of the digital economy, then people actually have to be able to use information, and information has to flow. And the last one was completely where we cheated, because we couldn't actually come up with an I that was good for trade, so we called it integration. But that I is meant to be trade behind the border, at the border, and across the border. So that's really the context, and the important part of that context is none of the I's works in isolation. By the way, the silent I was implementation, but we don't have to go there at the moment. But all of them work in a kind of a matrixed fashion. They work in an ecosystem, because if you hold any one eye, it will have ripple effects in the other eyes. What's your ability to innovate when you can't find investment? Well, we see lots of places where there are no capital markets, and we see lots of patents but no exploitation of those patents. What happens if you don't have the right infrastructure? What happens if your folks don't have the right intellectual capital? These are all working in tandem with each other. And so trade is very important, because a lot of these issues are the concepts of not just fluid borders, but global ecosystems. And how do we think about those things? And the more you're going to hear about both the infrastructure, the technology, and the policy, the more you understand the need for it to be interoperable, the need for global systems to be able to be perpetuated. And so that's going to be kind of the basis of how we're looking at some of these innovative ideas. And we'll start with kind of some of the basic building blocks of innovation, which are at the infrastructure and platform level. And we'll ask David to start off with that.
Great. Well, thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here. As probably most of you know, Verizon is a global technology solutions provider. We have a presence in 152 countries worldwide, data centers in 22, and we invest very large sums of money in these platforms for innovation, the infrastructure for innovation, and these are platforms that we use to build innovative solutions, but that others can also use to build on and innovate on to provide solutions for important societal needs. I'm going to just step through some of these things, but just in terms of context, we've invested over $80 billion over the last 5 years in these platforms around the world. And one of the ones that has gotten a lot of attention recently, of course, is our LTE deployment. So this is our 4th generation mobile broadband technology. It's been deployed now throughout the United States. It's available to about 95% of the population of the US. And this is a mobile broadband platform that's delivering speeds of 5 to 12 megabits per second downstream to the device and 2 to 5 megabits upstream. That, of course, is capable of increasing in speed as new technologies and new spectrum becomes available to enable that. And so keeping the spectrum pipeline open is a key to enabling this platform to continue to grow and enable the types of applications that it's enabling. But one of the things that we did when we started to deploy this, it was a new technology, new standards, and there weren't devices out there. There was really nothing. So we were starting from ground zero. And the question was, how do we jumpstart the ecosystem? And so what we did was opened an innovation center in Waltham, Massachusetts, and we invited people to come in and build devices, test devices, work with our engineers, and take advantage of the expertise that we could provide to them. We didn't ask for a piece of the action. No, they didn't have to give up any intellectual property rights. They didn't have to even commit to deploying on Verizon's network. They were free to take that and deploy it wherever they wanted. But the result of that has been pretty astounding, and we have seen the rapid introduction of devices that are able to use the LTE network and take advantage of that. And so this is really, I think, a very important thing because it is a fundamental building block to enable the Internet of Things. We went from connecting places to connecting people, and now we're moving to connecting everything. And LTE is, the LTE network is an important building block in allowing us to connect everything. Today we have roughly 1 device per person in the US. I know in other countries that number is higher, but it's expected to grow rapidly. By 2017, 3 devices per person, and by 2020 in the US, over 30 billion connected devices. So these are consumer devices, and that's where we see a lot of the innovation occurring. But it's other devices too, devices for improving healthcare, for energy management, for telematics, connecting cars, and those sorts of things. So the LTE network is an important piece of our innovation platform. Another, which is more domestically focused, of course, is our Fios network. This is the fiber to the home network that we've now built out past 15 million homes, and providing very high-speed data, voice, and video services. What many of you probably experience us as is a global IP network provider, and of course we do have our global IP backbone, undersea cables, and all of the infrastructure associated with that. And more recently, we have become a major cloud provider with the acquisition of the Terramark assets and expansion into the cloud solutions space. And really, it's bringing all of these things together that I think creates some unique opportunities for enabling innovation. And I'm just going to use an example of something that we just recently announced, and that's a solution called Converged Health Monitoring. And basically, this marries the LTE network. It allows it's a patient to doctor tool that allows doctors to monitor the health of the patient between visits. So the patient at home can collect blood pressure, glucose, all of these types of biometric information, have that securely loaded to the cloud in a way that's compliant with the health privacy laws in the US, and make that data available for the consumer to see, for the patient to see how they're doing, with respect to these things, but more importantly, to allow the clinician to monitor the patient's health, to see trends, to be alerted for spikes or other anomalies, and to also be alerted if the patient isn't doing the tests and collecting the data necessary. So this is a solution that allows a scalable approach. All of the piece parts are available today, but bringing them together in a way that allows them to be more quickly adopted and more widely adopted is an important piece of it. And it enables innovation in the devices, because a device maker can now tie it into a delivery system that allows their solution to be integrated into the health process. So all of these things, I think, are illustrative of the benefits of the innovation platforms. And all of it really depends on the policy framework that allows this type of innovation to continue. I think that one of the most basic things that has enabled all of this is the longstanding approach to internet policy with the multi-stakeholder governance model. And so preserving that and continuing that is a very important and necessary thing to keep this going. But all of this is also flowing across borders and enables solutions to be developed in one area and migrate very rapidly everywhere, as long as there aren't restrictions that would impede the ability to move the information across borders, or mandates to localize the data in particular markets, or those sorts of things. So I think that moving forward, we really want to just keep the focus on policies that encourage investment, that encourage experimentation and innovation, that don't unnecessarily impose economic regulations, that rely primarily on competition where it can, to encourage competition and rely on competition. And when intervention is required, to apply it in a technology-neutral manner that doesn't look at just one type of provider, but really looks more broadly across the entire ecosystem. I think if we do that, we can take these technologies and really allow them to be focused on improving lives, improving society, by opening the floodgates of innovation to address these important societal needs. So with that, I will yield back my time and allow my colleagues to continue.
And we've got, Mahmoud is going to go next, and I think he's got some slides, so if we could get up his slides. And Mahmoud, essentially we've got, David has laid out a context for us. And someone working on the slides, I hope, while I'm giving you time. There you go. David has worked out a concept where people interact with people, people interact with objects, objects interact with objects in computer-aware environments to take advantage of cloud services supported by a new level of analytics that we've never seen before. So can you help us think about this new environment for some of these services and some of these opportunities that exist on top of that platform?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to this conference and share my thoughts on the panel. This is the first policy conference that I go to. I usually hang out at the technology, innovation, and industry conferences. And I must say I've learned quite a bit this morning just being here already. So I appreciate that very much. I also realize I'm the only one, not maybe, at least the first one using charts. So I may be remembered as the guy with the charts. But that's kind of the medium, and hopefully through that, trying to communicate a broader perspective, a picture worth 1,000 words type of a scenario. Of course, my company, IBM, as far as the services, a major portion of our business, services innovation agenda has been core for our business and our clients. We have been supporting services, science, and innovation across academia for skills and resources, as well as working with our colleagues in the industry and clients in furthering the agenda. And my own function, which is supporting research and innovation for our services business, really brings me here to talk about the data, to talk about the free flow of data, the importance of it, and really give you a perspective from the industry, from the technological advances, what it means to economy, what it means to the society, and what it means to the growth, and why this is so important as far as having the free flow of information as a major topic of the agenda within the policy. So just to put in context of where the technology has been really evolving, we look at this in some major waves that innovation is enabling. Post the Industrial Revolution and mechanization, of course, the computing IT technology has been the major of the growth within industries, with enterprises. And if we go through the last number of decades, we've gone from a number of waves, from the back office computing to client server, the creation of the World Wide Web that started for the first time, the sharing of the information and putting that to use on the internet as well as within the intranet, has really given rise to tremendous growth within the economy, with enterprises, as well as within the society. And where we are at the next major aspect of technology is the confluence of mobile, social, analytics, all delivered on cloud. And this perfect storm of innovation is enabling tremendous growth around the world. On parallel to this, we have moved from computing technologies to be more of a programming medium to execute a certain logic following a set of steps for process automation, sharing of information, transactions, and so on, to what we see as the new era of computing that is cognitive. This new era is far more data-driven, it's far more on insights that we can generate, and it's the new model of taking advantage of data and information and generating new industries and new economic growth. Big data, data that's surrounding all of us, is the foundation for all of these platforms and this economic growth. David already talked about the mobile evolution as well as the machine-to-machine interfaces. But if, in addition to that, you look at economies in Africa, 18% of Africa's GDP is going to ride on mobile money. That's a tremendous portion of their economic growth that's enabled by all these technologies as well as data. We're going to see in 2 years, a third of the consumer data is going to be shared on cloud. We're seeing a tremendous growth of the digital consumers, giving rise to digital commerce and digital economy in our society. So if you put all of these together, and if I can get to the next chart, we are just at the beginning of this explosion of data that's available to us through all of these media. And what is giving rise to this explosion of data is the mobile devices, all the sensors that are surrounding us in our phones, in our pockets, in our cars, at home, hospitals, at place of work. The new types of information, unstructured information that's coming along, coming from social media, for example. We're going to see a lot more image, video data, and what we see as a multimedia that's going to be generating all around us. And if you just take this data and try to generate some context out of that, and looking at the total context that is generated, the amount of information that's surrounding us, it's getting to an astronomical degree. This is giving rise to tremendous new opportunities. So if you look at healthcare, and you look at the aggregate data that you can take advantage of course, making sure that the patient and the personal information is protected. That is a very, very important aspect that we consider and needs to be considered. But once you look at the aggregate data, the total industry in healthcare is completely revolutionizing based on data. So looking at cancer treatment, for example, and the ability to quickly look at the genomics, looking at various cancer patterns, sharing that information in aggregate with other patients, sharing the information as far as the treatment, so on and so forth, is completely revolutionizing the way cancer treatment is done. And this is going to accelerate so that in every local hospital, the capabilities are going to be available that are already available in some of the top institutions and hospitals today. For that to happen, we have to have access to data, free flow of information, so that that information has to be shared. Now, if you look at the genomics, genomics is not driven by a country, is not driven by a geography. We all come from very few places, this origin of our race, and that is what we all share in genomics as far as the patterns that we all carry. So any treatment that shows success in Europe, it would be valuable to see here, so it's valuable to see in China. That doesn't see any borders, that doesn't need to see any borders as far as free flow of information. Just one example in healthcare, and specifically on cancer, how this is really revolutionizing the treatment, which is of course very important to the society. You look at other aspects of this, with all the social data around us, with mobility, and having access to mobile devices, location information being available, and again, making sure that the personal information is protected. And when you look at the aggregate data, businesses are put together, and they are around the world starting to look at a new dimension of growth in digital commerce. That's the foundation for digital commerce, for people moving from the web onto the mobile device. And the context makes this very important as far as being able to reach the respective consumers at the right time and the right place, and is really becoming the competitive advantage for the businesses and enterprises that deal with millions of consumers. So data is really the new form of information technology that is giving businesses and enterprises and society new ways of growing, new ways of solving problems, new ways of innovating in new dimensions. And I would say, in fact, for many enterprises, what we see is that on the back office, there is tremendous effort on driving costs down, driving efficiencies, productivities, and the investment in these new spaces to grow new businesses, to grow new economies, to grow a digital economy, and to grow digital commerce. For that, the free flow of information is essential, and without it, it will be completely stifled as far as growth and innovation. I would like to finalize my remarks here by the fact that the open flow and trade and policy that must support it needs to be obviously balanced with security and all the technology that we can put around the personal information to reach a balance between the needs of privacy, the needs of security, as well as the open flow that gives rise to tremendous new opportunities for the society, for the enterprises, and for economy to grow. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Rob, we've heard about the infrastructure, we've heard about the need for data and services, and so what can economies do to help or to hurt when it comes to trade and policy?
Well, thank you, Joe. Maybe to put it into context, let me just quickly kind of give an overview of services innovation, because I think we've heard a little bit about it, but I think it's understanding what the barriers are. You need to understand a little bit about what's going on there. I think what we really need to be talking about today in the global economy is the services era. And the question is, what's different about the services era than the old industrial era? One of them, which we've heard about, is that data is the new raw material. The data is really what drives the services era. Secondly is that IT is really half of the factory, if you will, and frontline workers are the other half of the factory. In fact, there's a recent study by UNCTAD that showed that half of all global trade is now IT enabled. So without IT, we would see much less global trade. The other component of this is that the internet itself is essentially what used to be the trucks and the roads, that the internet is the way we're providing these services, and that the customer experience itself, which is mediated through technology, is really the end product for many, many services. What's important about this is that these new innovations, IT-enabled innovations, are breaking down market barriers. So we're seeing new entrants into traditional markets because technology, IT is enabling that, but also breaking down geographic barriers. So I think about what are we seeing now in business services innovation. We couldn't agree more that data itself in and of itself is an innovation enabler. That's the reason we just launched in June a new Center for Data Innovation. In fact, we'll be releasing a kind of data innovation for dummies report on Monday, which doesn't imply that you're a dummy if you need to read it, but it's datainnovation.org if you're interested. But to give you some examples, Kaiser Permanente implemented a data sharing system within their medical facilities. They enabled personalized care because of all this data they could mine, and they reduced office visits by 26%. Many of you know Progressive Insurance, auto company. They have received over $1 billion in premiums using essentially a usage-based auto policy based upon sensor data, satellite data that knows exactly how much you drive. A startup company recently, Zest Finance, they used machine learning on over 70,000 data sources to accurately predict their credit rating product. Again, couldn't really do that without the ability to take all this data, put it in one place, have it transferred over a high-speed network, and then do analytics with it. So that's some of what we're seeing with data, but we're seeing innovation in services in a lot of other areas other than data. I think one is in much more self-service applications. We're going to see much better kiosks. Kiosks are already pretty good, but they're going to be a lot better. They're going to be a lot more personalized, a lot more easy to use. We're going to see kiosks in a lot of areas. NFC phones, which we're lagging behind, although I do know that my new phone has NFC capability, which I was pleased to see. But NFC, near-field communication technologies on phones, your ability to use your phone as a self-service device. Clearly cloud enabling new business models, new applications. One thing that we see a lot, I think is really interesting, is better utilization of existing assets through mobile in particular. Take a company like Zipcar, Uber, Airbnb. These are all technologies that allow you to use assets in a much more efficient way. Many of them enabled by mobile. You really couldn't do Zipcar without a mobile device. Zipcar, I believe, has an app where you can go into the Zipcar lot and just press a button and the horn will go off or the lights will go off and it'll tell you exactly where your car is. The other big area, I think, is that the web is breaking down geographical barriers much, much more than we've ever seen. We're going to see this in health in the U.S. where we're not just talking international, we're talking 50 state barriers. To be able to go online and be able to access a doctor in real time in your network who may not be in your state, or they may be on vacation somewhere else and they're doing it through a video conferencing. There are a lot of, I'll get to that in a minute, a lot of laws limiting that. MOOCs, massively open online courses. We're going to be seeing global college courses now. There's a great article in the New York Times about a 15-year-old boy in Mongolia who was only one of, I believe, 200 students out of 10,000 to get a perfect score on the MIT electronic circuits test, and he now is at MIT as I think as a 17-year-old, so that's just an amazing thing. Also intelligence to networks, we haven't really talked about that, but certainly telecom networks are getting more intelligent. The idea that they're just stupid pipes that are passing bits along, that's really the old model. Electric utilities getting intelligence, transportation systems with intelligence. And finally, my favorite is robotics. There's a nice article in the New York Times yesterday about robotics. They actually had this vision of robots delivering your mail. I think the real question is, are we going to get to robots delivering mail before we just don't have mail? That'll be the real question, which who knows whether mail will go away first. But I really do think robots are a little bit farther off, but they're going to play a big role. So what are the barriers? I think there are a lot of barriers, but at the global level, I think in some ways the biggest barrier is the mindset of policymakers, particularly in other countries. And this is going to sound a little bit odd, perhaps, but other countries look at services not in terms of ability to use services to create value, but of the ability to have services companies to export. Now, there's a really interesting EU report, European Commission report, very recently about services innovation in Europe. And they said, quote, we need to promote services innovation to help companies become competitive in global value chains. That's not why you want to support services innovation. It's because you get better services at a cheaper price. Now, yes, you can get global value chain advantages, but why do I think that's bad? That is bad because that immediately leads countries down the path of what we would call services mercantilism. If you really think it's about the value added rather than the use, then you're not going to want foreign companies to be exporting the service, or you importing the service. You don't want to be importing the service, you want to be producing the service. Or you might end up going in the other direction and saying, we're going to use localization barriers to trade to force services companies to provide services in country. So I think that just that mental model that countries have, that it's about the provision of the service in country that matters rather than the use of the service in country that matters, is a big, big barrier. We just released a report in Geneva a couple of weeks ago on a very comprehensive analysis of localization barriers to trade around the world. And this is, as you all know, rampant. In India, for example, you can't own dominant in retail, limitations on foreign e-commerce. My favorite case now that's in the news is the French case where they're suing Amazon, or they're taking Amazon to court because they have the audacity to give free shipping for books. Because we all know how anti-consumer free shipping is. You just can't make this stuff up. But in any case, they're doing it because they think it violates some law of not allowing discounts. And then obviously data center localization and data localization in and of itself. We'll have a new report coming out in a few weeks on that, so I won't go into a lot of details. We've heard about that big barrier. So what are some other problems? I think one of the other problems we have is that countries, and I put the US right on the top of the list here, we don't really think very systemically. So if the first one was a barrier, the second area is more of an enabler. We don't think very systemically about service innovation platforms. And David talked about LTE as a platform. So if we don't get spectrum policy right in the US, if we don't get more federal spectrum, if we don't do the incentive auctions right, we're going to have a platform that just cannot perform to its capabilities. But there are lots of other platforms. Health IT is a great one. I just met with a bunch of Danes yesterday. They have, in Denmark, 90% of Danish adults have an electronic health record or personal electronic health record. Almost all the doctors have this. You look at a country like Estonia, where most of the adults have smart digital signatures, so they can sign documents electronically. That is an amazing enabler of commerce, if you can sign documents electronically. They have that because they had a national strategy to do this. Last two things I'll just mention in terms of big barriers. I think one of the big barriers, no offense to my European colleagues here, but I think America is becoming more European and sort of adopting this notion of the precautionary principle, which I think has really held Europe back. I see this trend occurring in the United States, where our view now on a new technology is for the New York Times to write an article about how bad it's going to be. Or any other magazine. So I think we have this real problem that we're now saying, well, we can't do data innovation because there's some small, minuscule risk that we might identify someone. Even though, literally, we are curing cancer, not curing cancer, we are curing patients with cancer because of data innovation in healthcare and the potential for that in healthcare and a wide variety of other areas. And yet, I think there's a real potential that we will limit data innovation in this country in a very significant way because we want to lock that data up. And the last area I'll just say is, and it's related to this, which is there's a lot of talk in the last year in particular saying that we should really limit new technological innovation, particularly in services, because we need to have the jobs. And I can't think of anything more destructive than advancing services innovation than saying somehow we should worry that we're not going to have jobs, that we're going to have innovation replace workers. This was very, very much, and I'll just finish, This is very much the statement of Eric Bernofson and Andrew McAfee at MIT in their recent ebook, The Race Against the Machine, which was a 20-minute segment on 60 Minutes about how new technology is keeping us from jobs. We issued a report recently in September. I debated Eric, and I debated Andrew, and I just make it two-sentence thing. The evidence shows uniformly, categorically, without a doubt, new technology does not reduce jobs. No question about that. And yet it's become part of our daily sort of, in the daily politic now of the U.S. that perhaps we should not go as far and as fast as we want to go because of jobs. And I think that's a big, big risk that we have going forward. So I'll stop there. Sorry for going over.
Yep, no problem. So I mean, we've got the concepts, and I want to latch on to one of the points you made, Rob, which is changing the mindset of the policymaker. So we've got people working on TPP. We've got people working on TTIP. We've got people working on all sorts of bilateral arrangements. We've got draft legislation on privacy in the EU percolating, which has impacts on data flows. We have all of those localization requirements you were talking about. And we also have the fact that technology used for one purpose may also find its use in another purpose, and there you get consumer surprise, which is what the policymakers are responding to. And I'll give an example. I'm not sure what the car example was using as technology for how it understood, but it could have been using the RFIDs in tires. And every tire has actually an RFID chip. It's meant actually to understand tread wear so that the government can actually rate tires for safety and tread wear. And it's actually a very useful tool, and that was it was meant for. And some clever attorneys representing insurance companies figured out they could also actually tell how fast the car was going. And depending on your speed, you may no longer be covered by your insurance policy because when you hit something, you were going way too fast and you obviously weren't controlling your car properly. So you have all of these uses. So the question I'm going to ask, and I'm going to ask each of the panelists to take a shot at the question because I think you're going to take it from different arenas. When you look at the infrastructure, it's not your father's pipes anymore. Intelligence has moved to the edge of the network. It's inside the pipes. It's all across the network. How you regulate it has changed. When you look at the services, big data is no longer the question of you drive a question into a bunch of data to get an answer, but rather data starts generating the question you should be asking in the first place. And on the policy side, you can't just look at bad facts and kind of not understand the technology as you go forward into the policy. So how do we kind of get this story out, and what's the dialogue that isn't happening that needs to be undertaken? And I'm going to ask you to start.
Well, I think there's two issues you raised there, Joe. One was about trade, and one was about technology. On the technology one, I just think we should relentlessly say, it's not technology that kills people, it's guns. I'm just kidding. We should be relentlessly saying, you should not be regulating the technology, you should be regulating its use and abuse. And so that's why, for example, we came out recently in favor of state laws that would make it illegal for you to require an employer to require an applicant to share their Facebook credentials before they can even get a job. This is ridiculous. But you should never have to be able to be forced to give your private credentials. So that's an example of an abuse that government can say, look, you shouldn't be there. I would have the same view on cars, that you should not be able to use data in another way that wasn't intended for. You just ban that. Same thing with genetics. We have there's a great company, 23andMe in California. For $100 you can get your genome tested. They send you a kit, you send it back, it's all on the internet. But now if I knew that might be available to an insurer, and the insurer might change my policy, would I want to do that? So again, it's about that. On the trade side, I think it's about, frankly, that we should be the one leading that. We sell trade agreements in the US on the basis of jobs. I really don't think that's the way to sell them. The way to sell trade agreements, I think, is not about jobs, but it's about productivity and innovation. That's why we want an integrated market with the US and Europe. It's not about jobs. I mean, they'll get some jobs, we'll get some jobs. But if we sell it about jobs, then it makes it look like, well, if we get even more mercantilist, we'll get even more jobs. And I think that's where they start going down off the rails.
So I'll focus on a particular area that people often think of companies that started life as a telephone company in a certain way, and that they should provide a dumb pipe, that they should have a particular business model, and that that's sort of how they're viewed. I think that's very dangerous because really we are now part of this dynamic ecosystem and really need to have the same freedom to innovate without having to ask permission to help develop new solutions, new capabilities, and that's innovation in the technical space, with new technologies and network capabilities, but also in business model space and to be able to try offering services in new and different ways. And I think regulators have a tendency to be concerned about those sorts of innovations. And to Rob's point, the way that these things happen in the rest of the internet space is that innovation happens and abuses are addressed. And I think that same sort of model should apply throughout the entire ecosystem, including sort of the network providers.
And before Mahmoud answers, just remind people to start thinking of your questions because you will be part of this discussion right after this.
Just to add to our panelists here, I think any innovation inherently opens new paths to some risks, right? Cars, fantastic change of the way society, the economy works, but yes, you can also have an accident. Planes, you can go around the world and come to this conference and next day be in Europe, but of course, some other risks. So we have to put any one of those in the context of the specific and deal with that specific context as opposed to throwing out the baby with bathwater. So if you look at the data by itself, one can look at it from the past and say, yes, maybe there are fewer jobs because you can automate. But you have to look forward and say there are tremendous new opportunities, data scientists, new industries, new economies that you can grow to be a high-skilled data and knowledge engineer, knowledge society, and that's what we should aspire to, as opposed to look at the past and deal with some of the protectionism type of aspects of this. So I think, to me, the question is clear. Innovation, how do we take advantage of it? How do we look at how do we transform and create greater value? And yes, there are downturn risks that we have to deal with. And that applies to this as well. So I don't think we can just look at it in one shell and have an answer for it.
Great. Do we have any questions in the audience? Do we have any of the policymakers who need to be convinced? Obviously, if you're in this room, you're enlightened, so it's your friends we're talking about. Please.
Thank you. Sam DiPiazza, Citigroup. Great conversation. And today at lunch, our speaker at Luce commented that when asked about U.S. particular macro issues, that the way out of the U.S. issue was growth. And growth without innovation is sort of an oxymoron. You can't get there. But interestingly, I read something the other day that was describing the short-term, mid-term future for U.S. growth, 2%, 2.1%, and the challenge that was raised was that the population growth in the U.S. has slowed a little bit, but what's really slowed in the last 3 or 4 years is productivity. And there's very little productivity growth in the U.S. in the last 3 or 4 years. Innovation, and particularly technology innovation, that's what you're supposed to be about. Can you comment about whether you are surprised at that and what you can do? In the end, I think you promote innovation and technology by saying the real answer is productivity. How do you measure it? How do you convince policymakers that if we don't get this done right, we're not going to get that 3+ growth? It's going to stay at 2. Any reaction?
Do you want to maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think the single best way to make that pitch these days is around the budget. So for every, I think Ed may have said this too, for every 1/10 of a percentage point of productivity growth, you get, I can't remember the number, we have it in a new report coming out, like 20 billion, a lot of money. And if we could raise productivity 1% a year, 1 percentage point a year over the base, we would basically not have a budget problem in 25 years. It would be very, very small. So I think that's the biggest selling point, that with the retiree problem that we're going to have to be all, workers who are left are going to have to be making more so that the retirees can have some of that left. So I think that's the main thing. But I think one of the things that we need to do is we need to have a serious national analytical effort and why we're not seeing productivity growth. Denmark just started a national commission on Danish productivity. The Australians did one on Australian productivity. We sort of look at it like it's just this thing in the background radiation, that there aren't policies good or against. I think one of the policy problems we have is we have the very high corporate tax rate, which deters investment. We just came out with a report on trends over in capital expenditures in the U.S. over the last 30 years, particularly machinery and software, equipment and software. And we're down 30% as a share of GDP. So I think we need to really look at all of those factors. I think skills is one. I think trade is another. Regulation barriers. So I couldn't agree with you more.
I don't know that I have a whole lot to add to that, other than to say I know that this issue, it's not the first time this issue has occurred where people looked for the productivity gains associated with new technologies and didn't find them right away. And I think back to personal computers and the investments that businesses made in personal computers, and there was a lot of question about where were the productivity gains from those. And then when they were just going in to replace typewriters, there weren't a lot of productivity gains. But once they were networked and people started to take advantage of the new capabilities of networked computers, then the productivity gains started to flow. And I think we're sort of at that tipping point now with the connected devices, where smartphones today are being used for Angry Birds or Candy Crush or things like that are great consumer apps, but the productivity enhancing potential of those devices, I think, is yet to be tapped. And once it is, I think that's going to trigger a massive wave of growth.
Thanks. Let me just confirm one thing, since I was actually at meetings with the parliamentary delegation and other places this morning. What time are we going until? I had 3:05, okay. So we've got time, because I've got Big Brother yelling at me at the table here. Just wanted to make sure. I think we may have time for one more. There was another question in the back there. Could we get?
John Cook from the City UK. I'm always a bit concerned when arguments descend into national characteristics and the like. And so I'd just like to pick up on the point that was made about Europe being less risk-taking and the allusion to the precautionary principle.
Yeah, but the Brits aren't European, so you're okay.
Well, thank you for that, yes. I mean, I can certainly see that there are areas
Send your cards and letters.
where the American system may favor the greater taking of commercial risks on the basis of the way businesses are financed and the greater acceptability, as we are told, of bankruptcies and that sort of thing. But when it gets to some cultural question about risk, I just don't observe this myself. I mean, is it really true that in America we don't mind if people die of the odd the odd misplaced medical records? I don't believe that. So what is the truth of the matter, and why is this being referred to as an argument?
Well, I mean, I guess I'd just say the Europeans have a thing that is a principle that they use to guide decisions, and it's called the precautionary principle, which is to act first, think second. Think first, act second. Ours is the opposite. Ours is let's just innovate. Let's move forward. Let's drive. Let's see what you get. Pardon me? No, that's very different. That's very different than, I am not arguing for a libertarian philosophy. I'm not arguing that there isn't a role for social and health regulations and the like. But let's take just two examples. One is GMOs. GMOs are proven to be perfectly safe and to be incredible drivers of agricultural productivity, particularly in the developing world. And yet, Europe is the largest barrier to global GMO deployment because they have this precautionary principle. We don't really know, we don't really like it. We want our little, our French farmers to do their thing. And then the second thing is on data. There's a very good study done by our colleague Catherine Tucker up at MIT who looked at the European Privacy Directive. She didn't get any money from industry. It was just a pure academic study she did with her colleague Ari Goldfarb at Toronto. And they found that the European Privacy Directive reduced ad effectiveness for internet sites in Europe by up to 60%. This is a big, big barrier to internet innovation in Europe, and yet European policymakers generally don't see it in this way as a risk trade-off factor. They see it as this is something we just don't want. We don't want any risks to privacy, none. And by the way, I was just at a UK site the other day, and I had to click again every time I go to a UK site. Do you want a cookie? Okay, so this to me, you don't have to do that in the US, thankfully. This is a British law so I do think the Europeans generally have. By the way, one last thing. We were at a Services Innovation Conference in Helsinki, and the entire focus, when we brought up that services innovation is largely Schumpeterian in nature, it's really what it is. It's about creative destruction. It's about new business models destroying old business models. The European answer was, no, that's not really what we want. We don't want creative destruction in services. We just want more high-value added service exports. And I do think that that's an underlying sort of European view of the world that, maybe they're changing, but I do see it as different than ours.
Well, and I'll also add, sometimes you have questions of harms tests. So like RFID tags, those same things, those pesky things in the tires, radio frequency identification tags. What it means is, unlike a barcode, you don't need a line of sight to read it. It can be read in a certain level of proximity depending on the nature of the tag. So when we were having discussions in the EU about an RFID guidance they were creating, there was a concern that when a person holds an object in their hand, that object now has personally identifiable characteristics because you may be seen holding the object and the object may be identifiable. And the concern was there wasn't a differentiation between a bottle of water and what might be something you would be embarrassed or you wouldn't want someone else to know you're holding. If I'm holding medication for a disease I don't want to disclose, that's obviously a very different level of risk than my holding a bottle of water. My argument was that if I was wearing designer clothing, I should pay for the ability to have that broadcast because clearly I bought it so someone would notice I'm wearing it. So, it's a benefit. So it's just the harms-based approach really isn't there, which is partially because it's a little less of a risk-based approach. It's not just the precautionary principle. It's the approach to legislation and how you manage it. It's the approach to the government must protect the person rather than the person has to be able to work in a framework they can trust, but they have a lot more responsibility to take action themselves. With that, we're getting a little close to time, so I would ask perhaps the panelists if they had some final comments they wanted to make them now, and then we'll wrap it up there.
I start with just reiterating that the technology and our world data is a tremendous force for innovation, growth for enterprises and society, and we need to have a very balanced approach in terms of making sure the free flow is protected and that we are not stifling this innovation, rather opening new paths for growth and a betterment of the society.
I agree with all of that, and I think that we really do, stand at a precipice where we have tremendous opportunities ahead of us. I think that the forces are in play that are enabling these things, and that it's really up to all of us to not throw up barriers that will prevent it, but allow good things to happen.
So I'll just go back to the gentleman here's comment about productivity. I think that we need to make sure that when we talk about this around the world, that we're really talking about it from a productivity and innovation standpoint, that's why we want global integration. You don't want global integration so that everybody has a leading bank or everybody has a leading insurance company. You want global integration because everybody should have access to the best services innovation regardless of where it is in the world. And that's all about productivity and innovation. It's not about high value added jobs or whatever. I think that's part of the the framing that I don't think we've done a good enough job at.
Okay. Well, with that, please join me in thanking the panel, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Joe, and the members of the panel. Obviously, we could only scratch the surface on the subject of innovation in the services area, but I think that the panel actually demonstrated pretty dramatically sort of a virtuous circle between a technological innovation feeding innovation in